Okay, my name is David Leopold and I'm a politics tutor at Mansfield College, and I'm, like you may be, locked down at the moment. And three of us are going to speak to you today. There are lots more PPE tutors at Mansfield, but three of us are going to talk to you today. I've already said who I am, and my two colleagues will now introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Gail Leckie. I'm a philosophy lecturer at Mansfield.
And hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm an economics tutor at Mansfield.
We thought it would be helpful to talk to you about what might be the reasons for applying for PPE, the sort of skills we're looking for. So we're looking for careful, precise reasoning, the ability to understand and explain difficult arguments step by step, and we're looking for critical engagement with arguments. We're also looking for intellectual curiosity and enthusiasm for the three branches of PPE. And those are the sorts of things that you might show in your personal statement and in your interview. In terms of your A-levels, although Maths A-level really helps for developing the kinds of abilities you might use in PPE, it's not essential. And there's certainly no need that you've studied philosophy, politics, or economics at A-level. What we're looking for is a 3A prediction in three A-levels, which might or might not include maths.
In connection with what Gail just mentioned about the mathematics requirement, and given that I'm the economics tutor where mathematics tends to be one sort of part of the subject, I thought I would like to reinforce and say again that you are not required to have done mathematics at the A-levels. Nonetheless, of course, it's going to be helpful if you have done it. So when we start our preliminary years in economics, we do not assume background knowledge in math. So we start from scratch and then we build as we go. So there is mathematical content in the economic side of the PPE degree, but we train you as we go along. So math is not a requirement, but it will be helpful, of course, to have some training on it.
So I think it's helpful to think of the PP degree in terms of kind of two parts. There's the first year on the one hand, and then there's the second and third year on the other hand. So in the first year, students do all three subjects, and typically they have an introduction to one or two or three of the kind of central component parts of those subjects. And then at the end of the first year, students have the opportunity either to carry on studying all three subjects, or they can specialize a bit and choose to concentrate on two of the three subjects. And they'll spend that second and the third year of the course then studying those two parts of the course. So although we think of these subjects as really interesting and important to study on their own, I think the connections between the three subjects and the possibility of studying the three together is also a really crucial kind of part of the course, and one of the things that makes it a distinctive course.
I also thought we might say something about how the first year specifically runs. So I'll tell you a bit about the philosophy component. So the philosophy component has got three parts: logic, general philosophy, and moral philosophy. So logic is about good reasoning. So which arguments really provide good reasons for believing their conclusions and which don't. But it's also a formal approach to understanding good reasoning. So it's a kind of thing that underpins automated computer algorithms, for example. So it's supposed to be a formal way of understanding reasoning that applies not just to humans, but also to machine systems. The second component is general philosophy. So general philosophy includes what you might know of as epistemology and metaphysics. And so the kind of questions we look at there are questions like, can you know what it's like to be a bat? So a bat has very different kind of experience from us. It doesn't see very well, it hears incredibly well. And it represents the way the world is through its hearing. But what on earth would it be to be able to find things by echolocation? What would that feel like? there are also questions about free will. So for example, if you think about the fact that the current state of your brain is caused by events that were in place a long time before your birth, does that stop you being free to choose what to say right now, if you think of what you're saying right now as being caused by the events that are going on in your brain? The third component is moral philosophy. In moral philosophy, we focus on a text that's also that's by John Stuart Mill, who's also someone you might come across in the politics part of the course. And the sort of questions we might ask are things like questions about happiness, for example. Is it better to be an unhappy human or a happy oyster? You might think it's a lot easier to satisfy an oyster than a human being. Does that mean that an oyster life is a better life, that can be a better life than a human being? We also ask questions about moral responsibility. So you might think about the difference between cases where a death has been, where you've caused a death versus a case where you've failed to prevent a death. So if you think about cases where somebody's drowning and you could have saved that person, but you rush by because you've got something else to do and you don't save them. Are you responsible for their death in the same way that you'll be responsible for their death if you put them in the water? So those are the three parts of the three components of the philosophy course.
Politics part of the course, in the first year, there are basically two component parts. And on the one side, you have what we call political institutions, which is concerned with the empirical world, the real world. So it might be what you think of as politics. It's about governments and states and civil wars and political parties, those kinds of issues. And it focuses both on the kind of institutional side, questions about structures, whether you have presidential systems or parliamentary systems, but also questions about the role of constitutions, about political stability, and those kinds of issues. And then on the other side of the course, you have what we call political theory, which really has two constituent parts. It's both interested in political concepts, so the kind of ideas that you might throw around when you're talking about the real world, ideas about democracy or about freedom or about power, but it offers a more rigorous and careful understanding of what those kind of concepts might involve and how they're best understood. So that's one part of political theory. And the other part of political theory would be the study of the kind of history of political thought. So texts by famous dead people, people like Karl Marx, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Stuart Mill. And in the first year, basically we study some of those texts, but also associate them with political concepts of the more normative conceptual kind. So we might study both Rousseau's social contract, and then we might associate that with an inquiry into democracy. We might study Marx and associate it with an inquiry into the structures of power. Or we might study John Stuart Mill and associate it with ideas about freedom. So basically there are those two parts of the course, the theoretical part and then the more institutional and empirical part.
In the first year in economics, you will study three individual subjects, micro, macro, and as a new subject introduced this year, there's a statistics as well, which I'm very excited about having that course introduced. So what are these topics about? So basically we're trying to understand how societies work, the same way David was talking from the political angle, and also Gail from the philosophy side of the story. So these, we look at society, we want to understand them, but we break them down into pieces. So in economics, we will break it even further. And when we discuss microeconomic issues, we're mainly thinking of trying to understand the decisions that people make. So there are many decisions we make every day, but some that could perhaps be relevant to you. Why do we decide to go into university? Why don't we go and find a job instead? So what are the reasons behind that? And if we go to university, is this going to be any good for our future incomes? So these are the type of, well, one type of questions, but we can also start thinking about what makes people to venture into a startup, or why when we go shopping, we have a shopping list and we end up buying things that we hadn't put in the shopping list. So all these type of questions are addressed by the micro theory of the part of the course. There's also the macro side. It is the big questions of society. So why countries grow, for instance, and why some countries do not grow actually. Why is that? Why there is so much inequality? Why there is unemployment? So all those issues and many other more relevant issues as well are studied by the macro side. Now, why do we introduce this new course, statistics? Well, because we need to know the facts. We need to look at the data. And there's so much data these days available out there. We need to know how to use it properly. Data is very powerful. It's information, but we need to know how to use it well. And those are the three sides of the economics part of the PPE degree, which I hope you will enjoy. Economics asks all these why questions, but it's also about how to tackle those problems, how to address those issues in societies.
So just to close, we wanted to say something about the great resources Mansfield has to offer for studying PPE. So I think the really important resource anywhere within Oxford is other people. So in Mansfield, we have 8+ tutors in PPE. So that although you can only see 3 of us here, there are lots more of us in college. And that's a really high ratio of tutors to students. So the community of students is normally 8, it's occasionally 9, but it's normally 8 students in a year. So that's a really nice number. It allows you to be very close and cooperative and work together. And there's a real sense each year that the cohort works as a group, and they sort of have a friendship group together, and they cooperate on their work together, and it forms a nice community. So it's small enough that you don't sort of feel lost, but big enough that you have lots of people to bounce ideas off. And I think that's really important when you're at Oxford. One of the biggest resources is each other. Whether you're meeting in formal spaces like tutorials, seminars and lectures, or you're meeting in informal spaces like over dinner or in the crypt in Mansfield, you'll be chatting about your work, and you'll be full and buzzing with ideas, bouncing them off each other all the time. We also have a great library and nice places to study in quietly, because obviously you'll need to be doing lots of reading and studying quietly as well. We're really looking forward to you applying to Mansfield, and we're hoping to meet you sometime soon.